because I would argue that I think Jeremy Irons is amazing in this movie, but I don't think he's sort of the Kafkaesque hero that we know at all.
I didn't buy, I don't know.
But you know who would be? Was Joel Grey.
Yes.
And I just have to say, I cannot say enough about Joel Grey. Joel Grey eats scenery like you've never seen.
Which one's Joel Grey?
The one in the bathroom with the folder of the naked women.
And the guy who takes the notes, who comes around and harasses him.
Because, if there's one thing I know about Kafka, having never seen a photo of him, is he's not handsome.
No, and he's small. He's a small guy. He's a little guy.
No, there's
I'm Kafka. Okay, it's like you don't get bitter like this being a 6'1" handsome dude.
Welcome to Le Grande Bouffe.
The Big Feast.
With myself, Cole Smithey, and my co-host, Mike Lacy, and our special guest co-host, Mr. Michael Kimmel.
Hello, hello, hello.
Greetings, Michael. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good. We're so thrilled to have Mr. Michael Kimmel on our show. If you don't know, you should Google his name. He is a playwright.
You might find out noted feminist writer Michael Kimmel. So.
Oh, yeah. Is that you or is that not you?
I am a feminist. I am not the one who writes extensively on it.
Okay.
You don't work at Jezebel?
No, not currently.
So, playwright, off-Broadway director. I just was joking when Michael came in. I have a hat from his version of the Marat Sade, a.k.a. the persecution and assassination of Jean-Paul Marat, as directed by the players at Sheraton. I think it's the longest play title in history.
It is. It's one of, although I weirdly love long titles, and so I try and sneak them into everything I do, and then ultimately someone's like I don't know how they got away with it, because ultimately someone's like, no, it needs to be 2 words, and it's probably just a blatant.
But the Marat Sade does the trick. And of course, famed for Peter Brook's adaptation of it, filmic adaptation, which is amazing.
It literally is one of,
with the Royal Shakespeare Theatre.
People always leave it out as the best movie musical in that conversation, especially it's funny because people have been talking a lot because of La La Land, which is not, I won't go into my opinions, and because
No, you should. We can.
Feel free.
I like it. Please do.
We have nothing but hot takes.
But yeah, I mean, it's fine. It's fine. I think
you just don't come out of it humming a tune, which is, for me, that's the barometer of whether it's a good musical or not. Because I watch Hustle and Flow, and I was like,
it's so funny. We've had this argument before, and you said the same thing. Is like your counterweight to La La Land is Hustle and Flow, which I think is an amazing argument.
Well, I have to say, the guys.
Well, it's a musical. Come on.
The guys who wrote the lyrics for La La Land are Broadway guys, Pasek and Paul. I really admire their work. I admired their work in the movie. I think for me, ultimately, something like Marat Sade, it just takes you to a different world and to a heightened place that, ultimately, and listen, multiple people disagree with me because it's nominated for how many awards, but but Marat Sade, I think, is one of the best movie musicals, and I don't think people ever put it in the category the way they do, say, like Cabaret or
absolutely.
Chicago, because of the relationship between music and text, and music really works on so many levels in that show.
Well, we were talking just before we started recording about your affiliation with the Jim Carroll estate, which just floors me because I've kind of been on a Jim Carroll foray right now, looking for this poem that I know is out there and I can't find it.
Yeah, I mean, we just started, and we'll see where it goes. It's just exploratory at this point, but I've gotten really, really lucky to work with some amazing sort of existing material in my career, and it's no exception. So any day that I get to listen to Jim Carroll's music and read his writing, and specifically 4 Centuries, which is not the book of his that people usually go to. Obviously, they go to the Basketball Diaries all the time.
Or Living at the Movies.
Yeah, or Living at the Movies. Or Book of Nods. He was so prolific, and, the real sort of, I think we were saying, I mean, he was in the middle of the scene, Max's Kansas City and sort of that late 60s, early 70s, and then had this... And
shared similar experiences with Lou Reed. They both had hepatitis C. and
a fondness for heroin.
and you know,
I think I put Pamela Anderson on that list too. You know, that's not the most, but
yeah, but Jim and Luke got it from the same needle. Okay?
all right, I take it back.
I'd be very upset if Pam did. Like,
no, it's true. And I was thinking about that today. It's interesting about Jim Carroll because he died at his desk as writing desk on 9/11 of 2013. Is that right? Is that when he died?
2013, 2014, somewhere in there. Yeah.
Yeah, and somebody saw him slump at his desk. His neighbor, and it was the same house that he writes about in Basketball Diaries. He had gone back to Inwood and was living in the same building, maybe the same apartment. What do I know?
If anyone's interested, one of the things I read Basketball Diaries when I was really young, so when this project came up, I was like immediately said, please, how can I be involved? And again, we're such early days that we don't know what's going to happen with it. But he wrote a poem when Kurt Cobain died that's still to this day. I think it's something, I can't remember the name. It's like 8 stanzas for Kurt. It's still one of the best pieces of writing about that moment. And I think it was one of the things for someone when I was at a formative age, when we lost him, it was, in the same way you always hear people talk about different artistic figures that they lost, that they had sort of a connection to. And that poem really, really got me in a way that I don't think most poetry ever did at the time. So
poetry is such a lost art. And I remember hearing an interview with Jim, and he was talking about the difference between songwriting and poetry. And after he'd done the band, Jim Carroll Band, if any of you out there, I'm sure you've heard people who died. That was the big hit out of his career. And there's a great version on YouTube of him singing that with Keith Richards playing guitar.
Yeah,
highly recommend it. So he had Jim. The first album I think is just the Jim Carroll Band, and then
Catholic Boy,
and then Dry Dreams, and then I Write Your Name. Is that the third one? Mm-hmm. And that was it, right? He did
He
did 3 records, and then he was talking about going back to writing poetry, and it was akin to Miles Davis going back and relearning the horn because it was such a different discipline. Writing poetry is so different from songwriting. It's a completely different form. And he was talking about struggling with that. And so, this is a person who really took his craft very seriously and worked very hard at it. And it comes through in every single Jim Carroll poem. I mean, I really think that Jim Carroll is one of the greatest poets of all time.
Yeah. If people don't know him, I mean, the sort of gateway drug is Basketball Diaries because, it's his exploits when he was, I think, from the ages of 13 through 16.
Yeah, he was 15 when he wrote it, and then what did he win, a Pulitzer or something? He won some huge award.
He was nominated, I think he was nominated for it. I don't know if he won it.
Gotcha.
But it's just this amazing time in the late 60s of
it's
kid
so
running
honest,
through.
it's so raw, and it's just such a time capsule of New York at that time.
And don't watch the movie. Whatever you do, it's just a really bad representation of that book.
I guess, I know people have a relationship with that movie, but I can't. From the way you guys are talking about it, it's really shocking to me that it's from that source material because I'm not familiar with Jim Carroll.
Well, the movie is really interesting because they rewrote his story, and so what happens is, yes, they've pulled from that source material, but they completely rewrite an ending. He doesn't get off heroin. There's no savior who helps him. He really stays on heroin straight through from the late 60s through the early 70s. Until he leaves New York to go to California. And what's really interesting is once you take this sort of struggle away from him to a certain extent, that you lose what essentially was genius about Jim Carroll. It could be anyone. You could have invented that person. And they also modernized it, which is weird, or left it ambivalent about the timeline. And I think, for me, sort of
he was such a product of the 60s.
Yeah, mid to late 60s when the country's in turmoil and he makes such specific reference to that and it affecting all of his actions, and you take that context out and it just doesn't really have the weight that it should.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. No question.
Well, that was about 10 minutes on Jim Carroll, but we didn't watch Basketball Diaries.
And the good news is you don't have to watch the Basketball Diaries, but we are going to talk about Kafka after we talk about the beer.
What are we drinking?
All right, so I thought I really went with the gear on this Rogue Nation Brutal Indie India Pale Ale because
this was the graphic design that pulled you in.
it was the graphic design because it's got that great dictator giant gear that's crushing humanity, and then it's called Brutal, and it's red, so it's got that.
Oh yeah,
it's got that Eastern European.
There's a little bit of an Iron Curtain happening,
and there's the fist there, the rebellious fist that, as we all know, gets turned into a foot and then just stomps on the head.
You guys want to get sickled and hammered tonight?
Does that mean we have to go wait in line for like 4 hours?
Yeah, rations of alcohol.
Here's your thimble.
So, as is the norm, we try and let the guest come choose the film that we're going to talk about, and certainly Mr. Kimmel has chosen Steven Soderbergh's Kafka, which is a film that I had never seen, and this is the movie we're going to talk about.
Yeah, I'm a big Soderbergh fan. I don't even know I've seen half his movies, which is to say I've probably seen like 11 of his movies because he's very prolific. And this was a range of films that I had no idea that he had made.
It's fascinating, the sandboxes that he plays in.
Yeah.
I had seen this a long, long time ago. You know, it's one of those movies that famously they didn't release really on sort of home video until well later, but there'd be like copies because I think they did release in Europe, and I remember watching like some sort of taped copy of a version I saw, and this was years and years ago. But and I can't say that I loved it, but I was fascinated by it, and I had a very, very, I don't know how you guys felt, but I had a very different reaction to it this time.
How was your reaction different?
I definitely went in ready to not like it again.
Uh-huh.
And by the end of it, and part of it is because now we live in a political climate that gives everything a very different context, and it really hit me hard to the point where I don't think it's a successful movie on any number of levels, but I think the experience of watching the movie was very helpful for me in understanding a little bit about.
I think it's a divine failure, this movie. I think it's a huge failure, but there's a lot of things to really enjoy, not the least of which is of course Jeremy Irons in the lead role. And I could watch that guy read the phone book any day. And I think that he is much better than Humbert in Adrian Lyne's Lolita. And so you have plenty of Irons action to savor, and then the fact that Alec Guinness is in it.
I was gonna say, like, I feel like I like that Alec Guinness is in it. Clearly had one day of shooting, like he did in another film we did. He was in Mute Witness.
That's right. He was in Mute
another
Witness.
movie where he clearly had one day on set.
Yeah.
Like multiple scenes that take place in the exact same.
And he's great.
Yeah,
he's
great.
so
He's
awesome.
great. Yeah.
Well, isn't it funny that there is something in what's Return of the Jedi? 84?
Sounds right.
Right?
Return of the Jedi? Yeah, I think
83?
83?
I thought it was 80. I thought it was 79, 82, and then 80.
I don't know.
81.
Close
like
enough, close
mid-80s,
enough.
right?
Yeah.
But when he is like Ghost Obi-Wan, he looks like really bad, like really, really bad. Like they were like he showed up and they were like, well, we don't have to do anything. Like you see him to this day, and I feel like George Lucas probably redid him a little bit. But
And he was in Caligula too, I think.
But what's funny is what is this movie 8 years later, and he looks. I mean, rotund.
Yeah.
But also, like, something happened in that intervening time where he just looks so much healthier.
But he's so authorial.
Yeah.
He represents the establishment. He is the establishment. If you want your establishment personified.
And you know what's cool about his character is like he's the establishment, and the establishment is like a cog in the establishment. He's like,
oh yeah,
it is not my business to know why they ask things to happen at certain times. Like it's just not yours either.
Well, and you also see in this movie, I want to at some point talk about the screenplay a little bit because I think there's something in the writing of it. But there are people in this movie who elevate the material and sort of make it their own and make it feel natural. And then there are people who you see can't really get there in this world.
I think it's so funny that are you talking about the actors? Or are you talking about the characters?
I mean both a little bit.
Okay.
I mean
because I was astonished at how tone deaf Teresa Russell's performance is.
It really stands out.
That's the American woman.
She's awful. She's just terrible.
And she's not a terrible actress.
No, she's a great actress.
But it feels jarring to me that there's an aesthetic that you're either buying into or you're not as they were making the movie.
She sticks out like a sore thumb in this movie.
Did he DP this? Did he?
Oh, I don't know.
I would love to know that because I know he's known for doing
Walt
that.
Lloyd was a cinematographer.
So he was, yeah, okay. I was gonna give him a pass. I was gonna say like, well, he's young in his career, and he's DPing as well, so he can't. Also
But there's a lot of interesting stuff. I love the sets. I love all the Dutch angles.
Prague looks beautiful.
Yeah. So that's a huge selling point for this movie.
The film also feels like the film quality and like the set design. It feels legitimately like a film of the 1950s.
And they are shooting in Prague. They are shooting in the streets of Prague for sure.
I think you could show this to your average film viewer, or maybe someone who doesn't recognize Jeremy Irons, is what I'm trying to say, and they might be like, "What is this from? Like the 40s, the 50s?" Like, it's not like this sort of return to form to it. Like, it feels very authentic,
as opposed to the one he did years later in black and white.
Which one?
With the one with Clooney. It's like
The Good German?
Yes, The Good German, which doesn't feel the same way as like that natural sort of tone and style. Feels a little bit stilted.
They're really going for that Casablanca feel. I would love The Good German. That's a beautiful movie to look at. You could take any still out of that movie, and the composition is just stunning.
Well, that's the thing about him. Where he puts the camera is just amazing, and especially the foreground background action, the sort of contrast between two. There's this one scene where it's Jeremy Irons just sitting there dutifully working, and suddenly his like assistants pop up, and there's this whole bit of physical comedy that's uproarious solely because you're seeing it through the context of a very sort of still Jeremy Irons that I thought was amazing.
Yeah, and Jeremy Irons really is just such a master of beats.
Mm-hmm.
You can see in his face every time the camera is on him, the beats in his thinking are just so precise.
Yeah,
I love him as an actor, and I think Soderbergh obviously knew what he was doing with casting Jeremy Irons in this role, because I don't know if this movie could work half as well as it does if it had been any other actor.
Well, that's where I think ultimately for me where I sort of rub up against. I think Jeremy Irons in a sort of like noir mystery movie set in Prague of the time period is really interesting.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Then we sort of mash it up with Kafka, and that's where the disconnect comes for me a little bit.
Let's talk about the plot, which you've
all right. So I'm going to give you the lead-in for the plot, and then I want to hear what you want to talk about the script, because it feels like that's where we're headed. So the plot summary: set in the city of Prague in 1919, Kafka tells the tale of an insurance worker who gets involved with an underground group after one of his co-workers is murdered. The underground group, responsible for bombings all over town, attempts to thwart a secret organization that controls the major events in society. He eventually penetrates the secret organization in the castle in order to confront them.
So what you notice from that is it not saying this is a biopic of the author Franz Kafka.
This is where we get in a little trouble.
Yeah, this is ultimately where I have trouble sort of getting past, because you feel like, and I did some reading prior to coming here, because I was like, once I read, I was like, I have to know more.
Cool, awesome.
And like the screenwriter Lim Dobbs and Soderbergh seriously, I think, had two competing goals. Lim Dobbs had written a screenplay trying to make something that what most people consider impossible, which is Kafkaesque, like a film that really sort of celebrated everything that makes his writing unique and wonderful. Meanwhile, Soderbergh's talking about, I just wanted to make a thriller.
Mm-hmm.
And and Dobbs is, which is really funny because he also wrote The Limey, he wrote Haywire for Soderbergh. He also weirdly did the rewrite on Romancing the Stone, which is fascinating. Also, from someone that does a little bit of script doctor work, I'm like, I'm dying to know which is his and what isn't, But they famously, like, Dobbs goes out after this movie. It's not really well received, and he basically trashes what Soderbergh does with it. Like, the actors are changing lines. He singles out Ian Holm as someone who, like, changes lines on a whim. Like that they're not precious with it. That Soderbergh cut major things out of his screenplay.
Ouch!
And it's really, really interesting. And then
and Soderbergh was coming off of a divorce, I think.
Yeah, he's also coming off of
What year is
Sex,
this?
Lies, and Videotape,
so
91.
So this is like 90, what, 3 or 4?
91.
Is this his follow-up?
What year is this?
Oh, this is right after.
This is right after Sex, Lies, and Videotape?
So
Yeah.
it's crazy. It's crazy we haven't covered Sex Lies yet, because that's kind of exactly the sort of movie that we do.
Yeah.
And it could also not be more of a different film than this.
No.
This is such a bold choice for him to go from making a movie essentially on like VHS that's like beautifully well shot and acted to this
with this really
monochrome
challenging script.
Yeah. To like a monochromed like period piece in Prague. Like it's like the most
About Kafka, but not about Kafka.
Well, and
Yeah.
did we mention that the film is in black and white? So we were on a roll here because we did
mostly.
we did Rumblefish, which is also mostly in black and white, and now this one.
I thought it was interesting. It's also really funny. Spoiler alert, but the movie's 20 odd years old. But part of the climactic scene is shot in color,
Right.
and so I'd be really interested to hear you guys about how effective you thought that was, because in terms of tone, I have my own thoughts, but I'm curious about what you guys.
Mike, hit it first.
It struck me like firstly that I thought the color was actually like a beautiful version of color. It's not Technicolor, and it's also not exactly like what a 1992 film looks like. It was like another choice of it. So like aesthetically, it's very Soderbergh, who is like, if you don't know, it's like and we've been saying like an extremely like aesthetic and like beautiful visual filmmaker. And so like that's the first thing that hit me, and then it immediately feels like a sort of philosophical comment that it's making, that like this is the reality and he has stepped into another realm. And it's, the first movie that comes to mind is like Wizard of Oz, right?
Yeah.
Like a movie that's like, it's mostly in color, but then there's a black and white to it. But it's a thing that is less like experiential and more like, what do I think about that?
Yeah.
And, which was to say, like, I don't know exactly what I think about it currently,
Well, for me, it just, I felt like it kind of negated the film, but we already talked about that, because you've kind of already negated the character when they ask Jeremy Irons. He's coming out of a bar. Somebody his friends like, "Oh, where are you going?" And he's this horrible line of dialogue where he says he's going to work on a book with a man who wakes up as a cockroach or something, and then they kind of guffaw and go, "Oh, that Kafka, he's a clown." I mean, it's just an awful scene, and there's some real clunkers in
terms of that, he should have not been called Kafka, right? Like,
yeah.
That's the thing. All you had to make him was like Dieter.
Yeah,
and I think
and then you could feel nerdy and be like, actually, this is based on Kafka.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. But also, I do think this is the difference between what Steven Soderbergh wanted to do and what the screenwriter wanted to do. Because I would argue that I think Jeremy Irons is amazing in this movie, but I don't think he's sort of the Kafkaesque hero that we know at all.
I didn't buy, like, I don't know.
But you know who would be? Was Joel Grey.
Yes.
And I just have to say, I cannot say enough about Joel Grey. Joel Grey eats scenery like you've never seen.
Which one's Joel Grey?
The one in the bathroom with the folder of the naked women. The like
and the guy who takes the notes, who comes around and harasses him.
Because like, if there's one thing I know about Kafka, having never seen a photo of him, is he's not handsome.
No. and he's
you
small. He's a small guy. He's a little guy.
No, there's
I'm Kafka. Okay, it's like you don't get bitter like
Joel
this
Grey,
being a 6'1",
Joel Grey. I savored every single scene with Joel Grey.
He's genius.
Oh
yeah.
my god.
Yeah.
He's got a toothpick and a spoon and a bigger spoon and then a little fork. I mean, he's working his character like, if anybody just wants to see, an acting seminar, everything that you ever need to know about acting is all in that performance.
That scene where he offers Teresa Russell a candy and she like knocks the tin out of his hand, and you like just the subtle look of like realizing where the candies went and then like trying to not be flustered. There's like a range of things that happens in like one moment. But I mean, that's what I think it's really like you're bringing up like the comment about the cockroach, the bad line of dialogue. There are all these sort of nods to his work. And again, as the movie ends, he starts to write out a letter to my father, and he's coughing. And you're just like, but I don't know how that being Kafka makes the journey he went through better or worse, right? So
I think it,
that's a good point. I hear that.
Let's assume our audience hasn't seen the movie. He goes on
He's an insurance guy.
He's an insurance guy who goes on an
mid-level,
adventure,
right?
A mid-level insurance guy. He's
a 9-to-5er, and he's got no life.
Yeah, he goes on like a film noir adventure,
but he's a writer,
discovering an undercover, like seditious, like underbelly that's controlling society.
Yeah, resistance group.
A resistance group, and then there's. And
they want him. They want him to come and write for them because they're not very good writers.
So it's like, as much as say it's like shit that.
And he's snotty.
It's like on. It's on. Like it's thematically resonant to Kafka. Not shit he really did, But it's also it's not like this is some sort of version of him going crazy and imagining he had these things, and he comes back and writes it.
Well, he's not much of a protagonist is the problem, And the guy who dies, he's like, oh, I knew him well, and you're like, but I don't know who that is.
But what's
the whole thing that the whole suspense aspect that the movie's predicated on, you don't know who died,
right? And I kept saying I felt like this idea of Kafka as protagonist. Like I had this funny joke. I was talking to my wife last night. I was like, she's like, oh, what movie? I was like, Kafka. She's like, oh, I've never seen it. What is it about? I said, basically, it's like Kafka got woke. Like that's the whole premise of the movie. And there's something while it's resonant now, absolutely. And I do think the way that they go back to black and white is really fascinating in terms of choices. That being said,
given his actions too, like it's not just visually, it's like he's accepting that world.
Yeah, and putting the blinders back on, right? Having been open to it, to the corruption, to the sort of machinations of the highest levels of government, he decides to go back to being sort of the clerk, right? And I'm not going to continue to fight for the resistance because it's a little bit of an insurmountable journey. That being said, there's something in this idea of him being Kafka that just rings false in terms of like the third man or like, Joe Friday. The two things don't seem like they mesh really, really well.
I'd agree with that. And I think, we're talking about this before, it's like I think Jeremy Irons physically is an odd pick for Kafka because it's hard to see, and this is like, sort of a shallow thing to say, but I think there's, obviously you think about these things of casting, it's hard to see a person who looks like that and has that body having this mental state. And Jeremy Irons, for being a terrific actor, I don't think convinced me that he's like seeing the world in this way.
No, but he's like a genius third man though, right? Like he's like, you can see him as amateur gumshoe really easily.
Yes. So if this was if this was movie and unrelated to Kafka, I'd be like, cool, like just like Czech Republic.
You know how
noir? Neat.
We were talking about Jim Carroll at the beginning of this, and we can imagine Jim Carroll very clearly.
Some of us don't totally know Jim Carroll.
That's all right.
You're gonna go Google.
But here's the point. You didn't really, because we appreciate Jim Carroll as an author just as we do Franz Kafka, and so we didn't get enough of that. I feel like if they could have had him, they needed to have some reverie things, perhaps with the metamorphosis where you're seeing how he's responding to his experiences with the revolutionary group. If he goes back, if he meets with the revolutionary group, and then he goes back to his room, and somehow in a maybe he gets sick and vomits, and then he's sweating, and then he writes the metamorphosis, and then you have this weird reverie that comes over and gives this whole resonance to the story, where you realize, oh, this guy's got a wild imagination, because that's what we're not. That sadly is what this movie's missing.
Right.
Is you want to get Kafka. Like, okay, this guy's a ball of fire. I need to see that fire.
I mean, they set out at the end of the movie, and he sets out like he's right. I mean, Kafka famously wrote, I think it's like 45 pages, a letter to his father that they later published. But it's basically 45 pages of like, this is how you abused me. This is how you ruined me. This is why I'm a shell of a person and I'm not functionable. And that person, if you look at those letters, that person is nowhere in this movie. Because that actually should, even though the writing of the letter happens late, that should be what we understand him to be. He's a mess. Like, if he is a Kafka-esque hero, he is, insecure, doubtful, and Jeremy Irons is cool as hell.
Oh yeah, yeah. The real Franz Kafka would never even walk into that little shack, secret shack where the resistance people are. He would never even set foot over that threshold because he's too scared.
No, and he's like walking down the river, and he's like eating something with Teresa Russell.
Oh yeah,
and he's like he's cool as hell. He's Jeremy Irons.
Right.
There's just no doubt.
That's a good.
Okay,
yeah,
so
good point.
this
I
is
take back every good thing I ever said about Jeremy Irons.
Jeremy Irons is
Not really.
amazing.
I know. I'm just.
So
But,
this is a segment that we've done a couple times. We should do it more often. Current actors recast. Who would you do?
Wait a minute. You mean whoa.
Actors who are working currently.
Recast in this movie?
If you remake this movie, who would you cast to remake this movie?
Okay. All right.
Oh.
Well, I would put Michelle Williams in the Teresa Russell part just because she's Michelle Williams.
Yeah.
But she could do anything.
She could play Kafka.
She could. She
could
really,
play
and that
Kafka.
would be a Fassbender.
That'd be
That would be like a
amazing.
Fassbender choice, and
Yep.
I would endorse wholeheartedly.
Wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Well, have you ever seen that movie, the Fassbender, where it's the woman playing Fassbender?
No.
Oh my God, this is a movie that has haunted me for so long. I saw it at the Ken Cinema when I was going to college at San Diego State. And there's this movie. Listeners, if you know this movie, please contact me through my website. Well, it's a film that no, it's not. Fassbender didn't make the movie, but it's Fassbender's troupe. And they got together, and after he died, like immediately after he died, they got together and they made this film where one of his main actresses plays him.
Wow.
And I periodically, just like now, I come back around to this idea of like, well, I gotta track down that damn movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing, and the woman plays Fassbender to a T. It's
I'm sure he would have been more
phenomenal.
honored than Sean Spicer was recently. For a similar thing.
The metamorphosis.
cheers
Just to bring it back.
to Melissa McCarthy.
Yeah.
I would go with Michael Shannon. I think Michael Shannon as
Shannon's
Kafka.
a great choice.
There's just a self-loathing to that guy that
Right, and also
that.
for the what's the Tom Cruise spy? Oh, Jack Reacher. Come on, they could have Michael Shannon would make such a better Jack Reacher. Come on, or Liv Schreiber. Come on.
Liv Schreiber.
Well, wouldn't they make it Michael Shannon versus Werner Herzog? And it's like I don't know if I can handle that.
I want to see it. I want to see Michael Shannon and Werner Herzog going at it.
First of all, Michael Shannon is going to play Werner Herzog in a movie about Werner Herzog someday, right?
Don't you wonder, like, all I want to do with that interaction is be at, like, craft services when they have lunch, where it's like, who's going to out-depress the other? You know, like, where, like, everything is nothing. Michael Shannon's like, I know. Like, oh, God, that conversation.
Nothing's not even nothing.
So wait, so we got Michael Shannon in the Kafka role.
I feel like you stepped it up a notch. I always struggle with one person's name who I want to name. But
Alicia Shawkat.
the main character in A Serious Man, who's also on Boardwalk Empire. Do you guys know this guy?
Oh, he's amazing.
Yes.
He was in The Arrival, right?
Yes.
Yes.
I want to go. Oh, man, I should. Really
He's
know.
genius.
He's one of my
no, if
favorite
I think
actors.
about it, I can think of. He's amazing.
But I also was thinking. I think Mark Ruffalo
Mm-hmm.
could do it. I think he could do it. As
As Kafka?
As Kafka, yeah.
Well, I think you got to fix the script. You got to decide that it's going to be a. Well, here's the failing of the movie. What is it? What genre does this thing fit into? It tries to.
It makes you think it's biopic from the title,
right?
And because the main character is named Kafka.
and he is Franz Kafka. He he wrote the Metamorphosis. He wrote
he writes a letter to his father.
So it's like, okay, so you're doing a non-literal biopic.
Yeah, and if you're gonna write,
what's up with that? And it's like, and I don't think it really.
Well, that's the thing is if you're gonna do a non-literal biopic, you have to because you're essentially creating something new. So you have to be very careful. It's a very delicate. You have to go in there with a scalpel as a screenwriter and know exactly.
Can I bring up
that's what I think. I actually would push back a little bit. I don't know. I think
you think the writer
the original screenplay probably was more sort of biopic heavy, and from what I hear or from what I've read, that Soderbergh was the one pushing it towards this thriller.
Okay, so all right, so for our ideal script, we're talking about fleshing out Dobbs' script.
I think you have to pick one or the other.
I do too. I agree. Yeah. I think so. Absolutely.
So I wonder how the story of this movie compares to the film Marie Antoinette by Sofia Coppola.
Yeah,
which is a dog.
But I've said this for years. I have one fix for that movie, and I think it would have gotten a lot better reception. Okay, you tweak it one tiny thing. You change the title to Marie ! People are gonna love that movie.
Yeah.
Right.
You're right. I mean,
makes it pop. Puts it in that pop.
Because it's not a biopic, you know. It's like, and it's just a little thing. Because it's like your thesis, you know. It's your logline is brought into it, but it's also your thesis in a certain way is in the title. And I went to this expecting a biopic of Kafka, and was totally surprised when that's not what it was.
Yeah, I just wrestled with a sort of quote unquote biopic. It's a play, it's not a movie, but project, and we were looking for sort of a non-traditional way to tell the story, and it's something you always butt against because the sort of easy way, because a life doesn't fit into sort of a traditional narrative, that it's hard, so that's why everything ends up fitting in that formula, right? There's that string of like movie biopics. It's like, sudden fame, drug use, downward spiral.
So that makes me think. I want to know more about what you're up to.
What I'm
Michael,
up to.
Yeah, because you there's a podcast, The Score.
Yeah, we're doing that. Well, we recorded 6 live concerts, 6 live concerts of new musicals. So we threw big concert versions of new musicals at Le Poisson Rouge in downtown New York City. And so right now we're editing them, and they'll get released, I think, hopefully in the spring. We'll start releasing them as a podcast. And it's just a weird thing of a friend of mine who does these things was like, do you ever want to do something? And I was like, that's the kind of thing I would listen to, which are like, it's like, millions of people bought the Hamilton soundtrack. And so and that's a full musical. So if you figure we could do a 90-minute version and free, somebody's going to want to listen to it. So that's like what I call a little bit of my hobby, because that's not like, that's when I have like free time. What else is going on? Well, we're doing, coming up, we're doing a reading of my new play at the Vineyard Theater, which is actually about podcasts. See, bring it in. It's a play called Stand Up, and it's inspired by sort of Mark Maron, and so it's a podcast comedian who interviews a famous movie star, but also notorious joke stealer in the comedy world. And so it ends up being this sort of riff on integrity and artistic integrity, and it's funny, and yeah. So that's what
when and where is that?
We're doing that at the Vineyard Theater on February 27th. Yeah,
coming right up.
Yeah, so it's fun, and Zachary Levi is playing our sort of lead.
So it's a one
night off, and then I think we'll Chuck of Chuck fame. We're doing one night of just sort of we did a reading.
Is that 8:00 Vineyard Theater?
7 p.m.
7 p.m. at the Vineyard Theater, February
27.
27.
Yeah, and we're doing it as just sort of
what night of the week is that?
It's a Monday.
Okay.
We're doing just a test bubble to sort of get an audience, see how it works, and then hopefully in the next year it'll open. Place to be determined.
Awesome.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you all so much for listening, and thanks to our special guest, Mr. Michael Kimmel, who, at this rate, I think we're going to probably have to give him back on the program at some point.
I would love to. This was awesome. What a fun movie to watch. Like,
Yeah.
what a good excuse to like revisit something.
Definitely.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, yeah. You picked the movie right up our alley. It's sort of I always describe it as like B-sides of movies by directors you should have heard of.
Wow, Soderbergh, like I said, and this is funny because this is his pattern, not to go off on a tangent, but like a really well-received, sort of big, kind of mainstreamy thing, and then he takes this left turn and does something, and you're like, what? Like...
Yeah.
I know. I thought Mike Figgis was going to be like that.
Yeah.
And then whatever happened to Mike Figgis? He just evaporated into the ether after he did did he
Time Code, right? Wasn't that it?
Yeah. Time Code was yeah. And
After leaving Las Vegas, which is
yeah.
a master stroke. Like, I love that movie.
I do too.
I love that movie.
do too. It's amazing, and it's Nicolas Cage's last film, where he was creating characters.
P. Cage.
You heard what I said. I felt like he like left everything on the field when he made that movie, and he just could never do it again.
I think you're absolutely right. Also, Elizabeth Shue.
Oh my goodness!
Never got her due after that movie.
And should, because her performance is it's Jenna Rollins level.
Yeah, it's so that movie. I'm gonna go home tonight. And
I know
watch
it gives me goosebumps.
But yeah, the Soderbergh.
We should do it.
We can do it. It's a depressing as fuck movie.
We've never done a depressing as fuck
That's
movie.
like,
on
what's
this.
That's true. No, we have not.
Aronofsky's second. What is it called? Oh God, it's gonna drive me nuts. Right?
Not like, was he Pi?
Not After Pi.
Yes.
The one after Pi. The one in Brooklyn with the heroin addicts.
Oh, Requiem for a Dream. Yeah,
And that is a genius movie, but like the most depressing experience.
it really is. It really. And what's the other one? Is it Gummo?
Oh
No,
God.
That's Korean. Yeah.
I broke up with my ex-wife, and she left, and it's like Saturday morning, whatever, and she's like, I'm gonna do this, and I'm like gonna call over my friends, and like, you're gonna pack up all of her stuff. I've been married for like 6 months, and I said, okay, I'm only gonna say this once. You're making a huge mistake. Please don't do it. Stop the thing that it is you are doing right now. I'm gonna go to the diner and get breakfast, and so you can respond when I get back. And sure enough, she came over and with her friend, like, they got all took everything. And then I made the mistake of watching Gummo.
Oh my God. It's a testament to human will that you're still here.
I agree. I'm glad. It's very good to have another human being like acknowledge that, because
that is a movie
rough.
you better be like
Rough.
top of your career game. Your personal life better be on point, and like everything has to be amazing. And you're still not coming out of it okay.
No.
All right, so we're doing Gummo next time.
Oh shit!
Oh God!
Oh my God!
But yeah, thanks. Soderbergh is like, he's it for me, man. Like, he's one of my top.
All right. Well,
That's great.
we're gonna have you back on the show, man.
I'd love to be back.
Awesome. Thanks.